Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our webinar today. I see there are some participants are dialing in now, so please bear with us for like 5 minutes before the webinar starts. While we are waiting, you could refer to our research and commentary papers in the chat box on the theme of China's public finance. Also, anytime during the webinar, you could submit any questions you may have through the chat box. Selected questions will be answered at the end of the presentation.
Hello. 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 听不到我说话？
听，
嗯，
你刚刚没听到我说话吗？在测试，你这不对，
Hello.
没有，
Hello.
好，也可以那个，
Okay. Um. Yes. Sorry for the delay. And yeah, today is welcome everyone. And my name is Jameson. Today I'm going to talk about China's current public debt landscape and the public debt risk and its future debt risk trends. And I will talk about how Chinese government is reshaping its public debt structure to, on one hand, support the proactive fiscal policy this year, and on the other hand, control the public debt risk. I will also touch on the risk of contingent liabilities of the Chinese government, as many market participants concerned about. And my sharing includes 4 sections. And the first is I will talk about the proactive fiscal approach implemented by the central government this year. And the second section is the central government's role in this fiscal approach. And thirdly, I will talk about the local governments, how the local governments restructure their debts. And lastly, I will talk about contingent debt resolution. Yeah, so the first part, enhanced proactive fiscal approach. So I will give a brief overview on China's economic backdrop. The economic recovery is facing challenges. So China's economy has been afflicted by the scarring effect since the pandemic and the aftermath of the real estate crackdown. The international circumstances, such as the geographic and political conflicts, are also taking a toll on China's economic recovery. So China's economic recovery cycle has not been in line with most of the developed economies. So this results in relatively weak external demands. So the first figure shows the real and nominal GDP growth. And the real and nominal GDP growth has reversed since 2023. And the real and nominal GDP growth, normally, the nominal GDP growth is supposed to be higher than the real GDP growth because of the GDP deflator. The GDP deflator is mainly caused by the price of the economic output inflation. And usually, the deflator should be positive. And when the domestic demand is really underwhelming, the GDP deflator can be negative, which is rarely the case for China's situation. So this situation demonstrates that China has a relatively underwhelming domestic demand. So let's look at the major economic drivers of China's economy. So let's look at the right-hand side. The retail sales have shown a downward trajectory in the growth rate, and the industrial added value has kept a sanguine growth. So this also reflects the relatively weak domestic demand. But fortunately, the positive growth of the industry added value shows that the domestic business activities are still vibrant. So in this context, China enhanced the proactive fiscal approach. To be specific, first, the government will maintain appropriate expenditure intensity to send positive signals to the market. And second, governments will use the investment to maximize its stimulating effect. And thirdly, the government should increase transfer payments to lower level governments to ensure the bottom line fiscal expenditure, such as the basic people's livelihood, and also ensure the wages and ensure the operating expenses. So let's break down the budgets in 2024. So in China's fiscal revenue composition, there are 2 major parts. There are 2 major categories. The first one is the general public budgetary revenue, which consists of the tax revenue and non-tax fees. So the general public budgetary revenue has been budgeted with a 3.3 year-on-year growth. And the second important part is is government's government fund revenue, which is largely consists of the land sales of the government, because the government can sell lands to land buyers as a very important physical income. So this revenue is subject to the weak domestic real estate market. So the growth has been budgeted at a 0.1%. On the other hand, the expenditures are supposed to have a significant growth, especially the government fund expenditure will see a 18.6% growth. So this shows that the Chinese government will expand their physical expenditure to a large degree this year. And the government expenditure will have several key usage. The first is the modern industrialization improvement, the domestic demand expansion, education, urban and rural development, and ecological civilization. The physical expenditure will largely result in a widened physical deficit this year. We use a broad caliber to calculate China's budgetary revenue, which includes the general public budgetary revenue and government fund revenue. So we look at the first figure. The deficit is the gray bar at the below. So we can see that in 2020, the China's government deficit expanded that year, expanded a lot that year, because the China implemented a very proactive fiscal policy to stimulate, to counteract the negative effect of the pandemic that year. And in the next year, 2021, because of the smooth recovery of the economy, so the proactive fiscal approach stepped down and the deficit narrowed in that year. But since 2022, because of we're facing many economic challenges and we're facing the China is facing the scarring effects of the pandemic. So there is necessary to carry on the proactive fiscal approach. So the fiscal deficit expanded since then. So in 2024, the broad budgetary deficit is expected to reach 11.1 trillion, marking a substantial 24% increase year on year. So on the right-hand side, let's look at the second figure. As for the deficit ratio, the official headline deficit ratio this year is budgeted at 3%. However, we calculate the broad deficit ratio of 2024 to be 8.4, a rather high level in recent years, demonstrating rather big intensity of proactive fiscal approach. So how Chinese government's gonna fulfill this, gonna meet this fiscal approach? So the central government will increase leverage this year. So let's look at the China's government debt level. We compare China's government debt level with the most of the global economies. And we noticed that China's debt level has been higher than the average of the emerging markets and developing economies. So, well, the blue line represents the average government debt to GDP ratios of emerging market and developing economies. And the gray line represent the average debt ratios of advanced economies. And China's, the red lines represent that of the China. So we can see China's line is in the middle. It's higher than the emerging markets and developing economies average and lower than the advanced economies leverage, which is personally, I think is a reasonable level because considering China's economic development stage. So I think China's government broad debt ratio is positioned as moderately high level among its peers. And but another spot we notice is that China's debt ratio shows a steeper upward trend compared to global average. And but another figure we notice is that China's very low proportion of external debts. As we may know that China's government debt, 99% of Chinese government debts are domestic debt and RMB denominated debts, thus easier to control and manage. So basically, we think China's debt level is reasonable and also manageable. But China's public debt structure requires improvement. So let's look at the first figure, and this shows China's outstanding public debt structure. And we notice that the central government's share of debt is relatively low, around 25% in 2023, whereas the local government debts constitute a higher proportion, and the contingent liabilities has a significant proportion, which is not a very ideal debt structure. So let's look at the right-hand side. The direct debt ratio of Chinese local government, the Chinese government, stood at 56% in 2023, and the central government debt ratio is only around 24. So that is a rather low central government debt ratio. But if we incorporate the contingent liability to calculate the broad debt ratio, we found that China's broad debt to GDP ratio will be around 100%. So let's look at China's central government debt ratio. We compare China's central government debt ratio with the major economies of G20, and we notice that China has a rather low central government ratio comparatively, and China's central government ratio is lower than most developed countries, and is among the lowest. And another interesting point we see is the leverage trend. We can see from this figure, like China has been increasing its central government debt ratio, but some other countries, especially the countries or the developed countries, they are deleveraging. So governments we think the countries are in different economic cycles and leverage cycles. So many developed countries are deleverage trend after the previous leverage boost as a important method to counteract the economic impact from the pandemic. And countries like China and Korea are on an upward leverage trajectory. Because of the very low central government ratio, so it's time for central governments to increase its leverage, hereby introduce the ultra long-term special bond. So the ultra long-term special bond is introduced in this year, and the initial issuance amount should be 1 trillion in this year and will be continuously issued over the following years. So the usage of this bond will be on the high-level technology, integrated urban-rural development, regional coordinated development, etc. And the issuance pace, we expect the issuance period will span between 5 and 10 years. It will result in a gradual increase of approximately 5% point in central government's debt ratio. And there are several benefits. First, the lower issue yield compared to local government bonds. And it will facilitate the structural reduction of government debt cost and improve the debt structure. And also the infusion of long-term capital will match with the strategic and long cycle sectors. So let's look at this figure, like the central government will increase its debt issuance, and the new issuance of this figure shows the structure of yearly government debt issuance. So in the past few years, we noticed that the new issuance of local government debts consists of the major part of new government debt issuance. But in this year, as opposed to the central government debt will make up of around 48% of new issuance debt, a highest proportion in recent years. So this trend indicates that the central government's increasing borrowing will lay a solid foundation for the sustained implementation of the proactive fiscal policies in the future. There are additional fiscal measures. First is the state-owned asset and resource realization. As we know, China has gargantuan amount of state-owned assets and a great potential amount of revenue residuals that can hand over to the central governments to support the fiscal expansion. And the second one is the quasi financial instruments such as PSL, pledge supplementary loan, which is offered by the central government as a supplementary financial tool to support the major construction projects such as the shantytown renovation projects, affordable house projects. And thirdly, we think the tax and fee reduction measure is expected to reduce in magnitude. So we use two figures to demonstrate this concept. The first figure is China's revenue and tax to GDP ratio. And we can see from this figure, China's revenue and tax to GDP ratios has been declining over years. And especially the tax to GDP ratio has reached to around 14% currently. So the right figure shows the global average revenue or tax to GDP ratio. And the tax revenue to GDP ratio of global average has been steadily around 14%, which means the government's tax to GDP ratio is on par with the global average, which means the Chinese government has no substantial rooms for further tax cuts. So we think this year, the Chinese government will try to, the tax reduction policy are expected to transition into a more targeted approach with a reduced magnitude comparing to the 2.2 trillion last year. And this adjustment aims to stabilize the macroeconomic tax level and fortify government finances. Next, let's talk about local governments. And local government is expected to restructure their debts. So I will give a brief overview on local government's revenue framework. So for local governments, their revenue includes mainly four categories. And the first two categories are the most significant parts. So the government general public budget revenue is the most important part, and the government fund revenue. So these two parts consist of nearly over 80% of local government's revenue composition. So we consider the dark red bars as the operational most regular income of physical income of local governments, the tax, the non-tax income, the transfers and refunds from high level governments, and the land sales. This is an important part because local government has rights to sell lands to the land buyers and mostly the real estate developers. But this part has been subdued because of the bleak real estate market. And we look at the transfer payments from the high level governments. It's a result of China's tax sharing system. As we know, China adopts a system of tax sharing where major tax categories are divided and shared between the central and local governments. So the central government, after the central government's collecting the tax, it makes transfer payments to support different local governments as a method to balance regional fiscal income. So all in all, we think local governments maintains a tight fiscal equilibrium. So over the past few years, the local government's own revenue has been subdued. The tax rebatement policy and the underwhelming economic growth has curbed the growth of local government's general public budgetary revenue. And land sales continues to shrink, subject to the bleak, dim land market. So the central government has increased its transfer payments to local governments, so increased the central, to try to help the governments to keep their financial ends meet. So we can see from this figure the physical income sources for local governments, and we notice that the dark red part, which is the central government's transfer payments, has been more and more significant in the local government's physical income. And we can see the light blue part, which is the government fund revenue. This part, the proportion of these parts has been shrinking, which means reflects the sluggish land market. So with the help of central government, the local governments have managed to keep a tight fiscal equilibrium. And local government revenue structure has a substantial discrepancies. So there are 31 provincial administrative level local governments in China, and their revenue structure has been very different. We can see from this figure, some rich provinces have a higher proportion of general public budgetary revenue, such as Guangdong, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, basically on the left side. And some underdeveloped local governments, they have higher proportion of refunds and transfer payments from the central government in their revenue composition. And some other governments, they rely heavily on the government funds revenue, which means they relied heavily on land sales to support their revenue. Therefore, these discrepancies have caused diverse deficit burdens on local governments. And the direct debt ratio of local governments persists to rise. So the introduction of the 4.6 trillion in local government bond issuance this year will further elevate the debt ratio of local governments. The local government bond had, we can see from the first figure here, and the local government's bonds can be sorted into two types, the general bond and the special bond. The general bond, which is for supporting government's general expenses, and the special bond is mainly for infrastructure construction projects. Notably, this year there is 3.9 trillion of additional local government special bonds, and this part of bonds will be directed towards project constructions. And our projection indicates in this figure, our projection indicates that the growth rate of local government's direct debt in 2024 will reach 11.3%, which will result in a direct debt ratio of local governments of 151%. So we notice that the local government debt to revenue ratio will keep increasing. So let's look at the right-hand side, the local government's bond issuance pace. So the issuance pace is accelerating. As we can see in the first quarter, the local government bond issuance is not so large because of the local governments. They still have some carryover, the financial carryover from last year, so they are not craving for funds in the first quarter. But we think the local government will expedite the issuance in the second half of this year. So we believe that the local governments will have more issuance in the second and third quarter, and the new issuance volume is likely to peak in Q3. Next, I will talk about contingent debt resolution, which is contingent debt is a hot topic that most market participants care about. So in terms of contingent liability of local governments, the contingent liability are mostly assumed by the local government financing vehicles. So what is local government financing vehicles in China? The local government financing vehicles are founded and owned by local governments in China, serving as the local government's financing investment conduits for years. So they are corporations, and they are founded by the local governments, and they serve as a proxies of local governments in terms of investment and financing. So their debts are largely regarded as contingent debts of local governments. So the development of the local government financing vehicles debts, LGFV debts, that are subject to several reasons. The first is the rapid economic development and urbanization. So in the past few years, the private investors, they shy away from the direct investment in infrastructure projects because these kind of projects usually require huge costs and no profit. But these projects have produced remarkable externalities. So to meet the growing financing demand, so the LGFV have emerged and sprung quickly. The second reason is local government officials' promotion incentives. So the central governments have set measurable indicators to evaluate the performance of local government officials, such as the economic growth, the fixed asset investment. So to accomplish these indicators, the local officials have strong motivations to leverage on LGFV debts to boost the local economy. So the third reason could be the unbalanced fiscal authorities. and responsibilities of local governments. As we know, due to the tax sharing mechanism, local governments have few taxation power but multiple responsibilities. So this forces the local government to resort to other types of borrowings. So that's why we can see from this figure, the LGFV debt scale has ballooned over the past many years. And we think due to our estimation, the LGFV debt scale has reached to a mammoth 60 trillion RMB, which is a great amount. And the LGFV debt has several features, such as the short maturities, and the most LGFV debts tenures are not exceeding 3 years, and they usually have higher interest rates. We calculate the average interest rate of LGFV debts to be around 5%, which is much higher than the government debts. And they have diverse forms, including bank borrowings, bank loans, and the bonds and non-standard form of financing. And it's very imbalanced across regions. So some regions have higher amounts of contingent liabilities, and some regions has limited amount. So this figure shows the broad debt ratios across different provincial level governments. So Tianjin, we notice that Tianjin has the highest broad debt ratios. And we calculate these broad debt ratios. The broad debt ratio is the broad debt to revenue ratio. So Tianjin has the highest, and there is also a large amount of contingent liabilities. And the debt ratios and contingent liability burdens are so diverse across different local governments. Therefore, the tail risk should be of concern. And the government strives to avoid potential systematic risk. That is why China is resolving this part of debts. And given the current context of physical and financial negotiations between the central and the local governments, as well as sluggish local government land sales, the resolution of local government contingent debts necessitates a comprehensive top-down approach. So hereby, that's why last year, central government introduced the package of debt resolution schemes. So the package of debt resolution schemes includes 3 major parts. The first is the special refinancing bonds to replace contingent liability. So this is the most important method in this package, because the local governments are allowed to issue special refinancing bonds to replace the LGFV's contingent liabilities. And the second is financial institutions to facilitate debt resolution. And third, central government emergency fund to support liquidity. So there are some pros and cons for the package of debt resolution schemes. First, these schemes will help to reduce the overall interest rate of broad government debts. For example, using the special refinancing bonds to replace the contingent liability can lower the overall interest rate of government debts, and also improve the government debt structure. And very importantly, this approach shows the central government's willingness to cope with local government's debt problem, and which can boost market confidence. And also it alleviates the LGFV liquidity risk and helps to discipline and enhance the local government's overall debt management. On the other hand, there are some cons. The special refinancing bond amount is around it's set to be 1.5 trillion, which is minor comparing, which is trivial comparing to the overall LGFV debt scale. As we mentioned before, the overall LGF debt scale is about 60 trillion. So the special refinance bound amount is minor comparatively. And the financial institution may be reluctant to involve for the debt resolution scheme, because the financial institution, they are lack of motivation to help local governments in terms of restructuring or extending their debt structure. And central government's financial help may come with local financial and political costs, because the central government's financial help is not a free lunch for local governments. And the local governments need to pledge their future cash flow to earn this financial help from central governments. And also, if a local government seeks central government's financial help, which demonstrate that the local government is in financial trouble, and which also means the local government is not managing their debt properly, which may come with a cost like penalization. So maybe the local governments will reluctant to seek central government's financial help. And last but not the least, this method gives rise to moral hazard and potentially foster optimistic behaviors among local governments. So how can we understand this? And the local government will think that the central government will help anyway. And why not keep borrowing? I think this reflects the soft budget constraint theory. Like the local governments may just keep borrowing. They think, well, no matter what happened, the central government will help to resolve the problems. So it will create a too big to fail illusion for local governments. So I will talk about the most important part of the package, the special refinancing bond. Today, a total of 1.5 trillion of local government special refinancing bond has been issued, with the top 5 provincial governments account for over 50% of total issuance. So to date, there are totally 27 provincial governments have issued these bonds. And the issuance pattern indicates a relative concentration of these bonds among a handful of LGFVs, a handful of local governments account for like the top, we can see the top 5 provincial governments accounting for over 50% of total issuance. Notably, provinces such as Guizhou, Tianjin, Yunnan have obtained larger debt replacement quota due to their prior history of more aggressive borrowing. Conversely, regions with better control over their contingent liabilities have received smaller quotas. So this is not a very balanced issuance pattern. And we see what's the effect of the implementation of the package. So we think the package of the debt resolution scheme boosted market confidence. So the plan has led to a notable contraction in the credit spreads of LGFV bonds. So this figure shows the different rating and different tenure of LGFV bonds and shows the issue yield spread of these bonds. And we can see that after the implementation of the package in July in the last year, July, and the issue yield spread of the LGFV bonds have been declining. So this is not new. Actually, the prior instances of LGFV, the local government contingent debt resolution, were also followed by an overall decrease in credit spreads. However, during those periods, the scale of the LGFV bond did not diminish, but instead continued to expand. Therefore, in the current debt resolution endeavors, it is of utmost importance to prioritize measures that not only resolve existing contingent debts, but also curb the growth of new contingent debts. So the recent measures indicates that the central government has intensified its oversight of new LGFV bond issuance. So there are several control methods to hinder the contingent debt growth. Well, after the implementation of the debt resolution package, so there are several documents emphasizing on how to control the further expansion of contingent liabilities. So we summarize a few key takeaways. The first, the central governments categorize the LGFVs and impose corresponding debt control regulations on them. For example, some LGVs are only allowed to refinance, and some LGVs can issue new bonds under certain conditions. And also, the central government shortlisted 12 key provincial level governments and reinforced restrictions. And also, the central government suspended or halt some construction projects for these 12 local governments. And also, they have a guidance for the higher level LGFVs to assume more responsibilities for assisting lower level LGFVs. The contingent debts of the rest 19 provincial governments will be structurally supported and controlled. So regarding the existing, so the provincial, it's not only the 12 LGFVs, the 12 local governments, because the central government think they are positive about the outcomes of the debt resolution plans. So they want to further implement the debt resolution plan on the rest of 15 provincial level governments. So most importantly, what content the debt resolution schemes are short-term resolution methods. Although there are some positive outcomes, but still we think these schemes are short-term resolution methods, while the long-term resolution lies in the fundamental fiscal and tax system reforms, as well as the prolonged strategic maneuvering between the central and local governments. So we noticed that the changes in the LGFV bond market since the introduction of the package. We see the net financing amount in the domestic LGFV bond market has continued declining, and the continuous 4-month decline is rarely seen in the history, which means the difficulties for LGFVs to seek to additional issuance, and but we can see on the right-hand side, the issuance volume of offshore bond rises. This is because that the central governments, the financial institutions, the bond market has tightened the grip on the additional bond issuance for LGFV bonds in the domestic market, which render the LGFVs to go offshore for bond issuances. So we noticed in the first 4 months this year, the LGFVs has a offshore bond issuance has around 40% increase of new bond issuance in the first 4 months. So let's talk about some essential takeaways of today's presentation. The future public debt framework of China will be the active increase of debt by central governments and appropriate expansion of direct debt by local governments and rigorous approaches to control and resolve the contingent debt. So first, we think that China's overall public debt burden is still under control, it's manageable, and is still reasonable. The second, the ultra long-term special bond will continue to serve as a key tool to raise central government's debt ratio. Third, the overall physical equilibrium of local governments will be upheld while deficit and debt pressure persist. And the debt resolution schemes are short-term resolution for contingent liabilities, but the strengthened management of local LGFV debt by the government will help maintain the overall credit stability of existing LGFV bonds. So as a strategic maneuvering between the central government and local government persists, the future landscape suggests the commercialized state-owned enterprises may merge as the primary drives of local leveraging efforts. So, I want to address on this takeaway because the local governments, the central government has put strict restriction on additional borrowing for LGFV bonds for LGFVs. So maybe but still the local governments will continuously seeking for additional borrowing. So there will be other carriers. So that's why the local state-owned enterprises, such as the commercialized state-owned enterprises, will serve as these carriers in the future to borrow for the local governments and to support the local government financing. So as a shift will introduce distinct risk characteristics and potentially prompting a real reevaluation and reshaping of credit analysis dimensions. So the public finance, I will have a brief introduction on the public finance and CSPI's ratings. As a leading Chinese credit rating agency group with 31 years of history and all licenses and qualifications in China, the CSPI ratings is fully Chinese owned with third largest market share in China and the record of over 30,000 credit rating actions to 4,600 over 406,600 rated issued and 5,700 bonds and principals, and with the principals of over 6 trillion RMB, provides credit rating service of both global scale and China national scale. A decade-long national leader in Chinese public finance with an outstanding record in default and spread statistics. An in-house proprietary local government database takes on information 3 times more than prevailing commercial database services. So assigned credit rating to 11 US denominated and 3 Europe denominated global bonds issued by the Ministry of Finance of China. So this is the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. So if you have further questions, we are in the Q&A section.
Now you still have 3 minutes to ask your questions via the chat box. Selected questions will be answered later by Jameson. Thank you.
So over to you, Alison.
Okay, Jameson, here are the questions from attendees. Will the issuance of ultra-long special bonds cause impact on the Chinese bond market? Could you please give us some insights about it?
Okay. Okay, I've seen one question. So, well, I think the issuance of ultra long-term special bonds should not have a prolonged impact on the government bond market. Firstly, the government bond issuance has been arranged in a, the central government has already rolled out the issuance schedule. So the government bond issuance has been arranged in a relatively dispersed manner, which reduced the impact on the bond market liquidity across different months. We believe the central government and local government bond issuance will properly coordinate to avoid concentrated issuance, so will eliminate the impact to the bond market. Second, I think the proactive fiscal approach is likely to be accompanied by a proactive monetary approach. So the loose monetary condition this year will facilitate the issuance of government bonds. Yeah, that's my answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jameson. And the second one is the local government financing vehicles facing challenges, right, in debt insurance. What's your view on their refinance risk?
All right, and I think the package of the debt resolution schemes has boosted the market confidence on LGFV debts. So as evidenced by the constantly decreasing credit spread. So I think the financial institutions are more willing to engage, and although the control restrictions have allowed the LGFVs to refinance, so they are not banning the LGFVs from financing at all. So the refinance risk of LGFVs is controllable. And also, we believe the intensity of the restrictions will alleviate in the future, will shift over time. So we don't see like the central governments will impose the sustainable financing restrictions on LGFVs forever, permanently. We don't see it as a permanent method. Yeah, that's my answer.
Okay, thanks, Jameson, for your excellent presentation, and thanks all of your attention and your time. We appreciate it very much. I'm afraid this is the end of our webinar. If you have any further questions, please feel free to contact us.
Okay, thank you.